Hi, everyone. Welcome to our series on doing some consultations with different mental health therapists who are in different states, parts of the country. And we are talking all about documentation and how it relates to different things. And today we're actually going to talk about a bunch of different things with documentation and how they relate to insurance and talking to clients on the phone and policies and things like that. So today I have with me Julie Cox, who is a licensed mental health counselor. Welcome, Julie.
Hi, Melissa.
Thank you so much for volunteering here. And I will let you go ahead and introduce yourself, Julie. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about your practice and where you're located and what you do.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Julie Cox. I am a licensed mental health counselor. I am located in Boca Raton, Florida, which is north of Fort Lauderdale and south of Jupiter, of West Palm Beach, where Donald Trump has his south, his southern White House, I guess.
Yeah.
Not about, I don't know, 30, 40 miles from there, I suppose. I've been practicing 25 years in this business, and I primarily see adults who struggle with addictions, eating disorders, and trauma-related issues, which are basically childhood abuse issues, physical, sexual, and emotional, verbal abuse from childhood.
Great. So you have some great specialties.
Oh yeah, I also specialize in borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorders, all the hard ones. That's who I see.
Awesome. Very good. Cool.
Yeah.
That should work really well with what we're going to talk about today too then. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for volunteering to do this. We are both in very sunny parts of the country, so we're enjoying some nice weather here. So Julie, one of the things, and you had listed a few different questions, so what we've chosen to do is kind of go through those questions in the order that we would typically come into contact with clients. And one of the questions you had was about that very first phone call when you're talking with clients. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your question there?
Okay, so I've been in private practice since 2001, and of course, when I first started in 2001, I went to a group practice and I was on every insurance panel imaginable. I left my group practice in 2011, and since then, I've seen a huge shift in going off of insurance panels to self-pay. So I wanted to join that because I've seen a huge shift in the healthcare industry where you have to document to the health insurance companies why you need to see your clients, where they put everything in a computer and I have no idea who sees it, what they do with it afterwards, and eventually, from what I've seen, it's going to go into a national data bank at some point in time. I've also had clients who have been not able to get insurance based on diagnoses that they've received from other doctors. They've been turned down. And I hold confidentiality very dear to my heart, and I'm tired of having to justify to anyone why I need to see a client, especially if they have sessions left. And I've had insurance companies tell me, well, you need to refer them out. And when they don't know anything about my client or my practice.
Right.
So when I have clients who call, a lot of times they'll say, well, are you on my insurance? And that's the first thing they ask. And I understand that finances are an issue, and believe me, I don't want to stress my clients out any more than they're already stressed out, and I tell them that. But I don't know how to do the segue from trying to calm them down and making it not about money, to trying to have them understand, this is really more about your well-being and investing in yourself.
Yeah, and I think, and this is something that a lot of therapist business coaches have templates for and scripts for how to talk with clients. And so a couple people that have really good scripts would be Casey Truffaut. I think she has a script in maybe both of her books. She has a couple of books on therapy
Yeah, I've seen
practice.
those.
And then also Miranda and Kelly from Zynnyme.
Yep.
I know they offer one in their boot camp, and I think they may have a webinar where they talk about this as well. So those are resources for people to check out, as well as for yourself, Julie. But as far as it relates to, documentation, it is a really important conversation to have with people. It is something that comes up, and it is something that I think is our responsibility to let clients know. Because like you pointed out, you've had people denied services, or denied insurance because of diagnoses they've received from other practitioners. So what we do does, live on past what we're doing and past our work with clients. And it's really important for clients to understand that. So I think that is really the important thing to emphasize, is why you don't work with insurance. So I think, what I would recommend and what I do myself is I tell people, well, I don't, I don't accept insurance because they require certain things. They often limit sessions. They may not cover mental health services at the same rate. And so for the sake of your privacy and for the sake of us being able to do the work that we want to do in the way we feel we need to do it, I don't accept insurance. I am actually personally on one panel, but I only get direct referrals from them. So I don't have anyone contacting me where I accept their insurance.
Well, I decided that I would stay on one insurance panel because it's TRICARE, and that's through the government that serves the soldiers and the veterans. And I firmly believe in that, and that's why I'm staying on that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Do you have a website, Julie, for your practice?
I'm in the process of redoing it. So it will through Brighter Vision. So.
Oh, okay. Great.
Yeah. So I have to get that up and running to transfer it eventually.
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing I would recommend, is have a page on your website where you talk about that.
Yeah.
And that way you're informing people right up front. So a lot of people may read that and they're not aware that, a diagnosis, that a mental health diagnosis can impact whether or not they get life insurance later on. They're not aware that their insurance company can read any of their notes that you've written about treatment together. And they haven't thought about those things, and that's perfectly understandable. So I would encourage you to really write up all of those concerns you have and have it live in a page on your website, so that when people are looking through, searching for a therapist, they see that right away, and that might prompt them. The other thing is that a lot of people aren't aware of what their actual coverage is. So they may be able to see you, as an outside provider. They may,
Right.
One thing that a lot of people don't think about is if they have like a flexible spending account, being able to use that to pay for therapy, a health savings account, or if they have a very high deductible. So if they have a high deductible plan and they would have to pay, for $2,000 worth of therapy before it would even be covered anyways, then that might encourage them to simply go with whatever provider they would like and pay privately. Because if there's somebody who's not going to meet that deductible anyways, then it's very unlikely their insurance is even going to cover any of the therapy.
Right.
So those are questions that I encourage people to ask. I do believe that people, like you said, if it's a financial strain, it's a financial strain. And if people need to use their insurance, that's what they need to do. I just believe it's our job to make sure they understand what that means. And then I have like a list of questions that I tell people to call their insurance company, make sure that they know what services they do have available to them, and make sure they understand how their mental health services are going to be covered. So a lot of times when you take the time to do that with people, and really explain the whole insurance process to them, and let them know, how to talk with their insurance company, they find it so helpful that they end up calling you back. So
Right.
I know I've had that happen, and I've heard from other people who've had that happen quite a bit too.
If you're out of network for an insurance company, can they read your notes?
Yes. If an insurance company is paying for services, then they typically have access to the records.
Even if it's out of network?
Yes. So if they're paying, one of the ways I like to look at it is it's like parents paying for a wedding.
Right.
So if an insurance company is paying for services, they pretty much always have the right to ask to see, because really what the insurance company was originally doing when they did that stuff is that they're thinking they also need to be able to make sure their members are getting the getting services, right? So they need to make sure that you're not fraudulently billing, that you're not saying you met with people when you didn't, that they're not paying for something that never even happened. And then also, like you said, that you treat substance use disorders, eating disorders. Those are two specialties that insurance companies often do look at very differently, because they want to make sure people are trained in those areas.
Yeah.
So for example, like I'm not trained in either of them. So I should not be seeing people with those disorders, as their primary concern. So an insurance company would tell me, that I can't see them. So in some ways it's good. It's, provides some checks and balances. And it is meant to make sure that, the patient, the insurance member is actually getting the services they need. But to do that, they do have to have access to pretty much everything.
So basically, out of network helps the client pay, but doesn't protect them.
It doesn't protect their notes from being read.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would say it's very rare that happens, but it is a possibility. And I've heard from some people who have been on insurance panels for years, and they've said it's never happened. And I've heard from people who aren't on very many insurance panels, haven't been on panels that long, and they've had it happen quite a few times. So it's very unpredictable, and it is hard to tell.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I never would have thought of that until now.
Yeah, and it's something a lot of people don't think about, and that's another thing to discuss with your clients is say, if you choose, to use like the super bill method, ideally you can get reimbursed for your, for what you're paying for treatment. However, that does mean that your insurance company may want to access some of your records, or they may have questions. They may have like a case manager call you and just talk to you to see if they really do need more sessions, etc.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would, and I do try to be objective with people when I'm talking to them about it, because it's really their choice whether or not they want to use their insurance. And some people really don't care. So it's not a big deal to them. That's fine. I think the important thing is just making sure that people are aware of what's going on and have all the information that's out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. Can't make an educated decision without having all the information.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people who do choose not to use their insurance once they find out certain things. So it's important that people know, how their confidentiality may be limited.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, does that help with the sort of pre-conversation questions?
It does. I've read that in with scripted phone calls that it would be like a certain amount of time for a phone call. This is going to be a long first phone call.
It depends. Mine usually aren't. I do like a 20-minute phone call, or I offer a 20-minute phone call. I do think that I have enough information on my website that most people know whether or not they want to work with me when they schedule that phone call, and it makes it a little bit shorter.
Okay, I guess people actually read through your website. I'm not of the opinion that most people read through things very thoroughly. So I guess I'll just have to get a spiel down to go through this, which I'll get down eventually to explain this in a neat and tidy package.
Yeah. And I do usually start off with just asking them, what led them to call me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't typically get the insurance question right away, unless someone leaves like a voicemail. A lot of times that will be the question that they ask. But usually I'm able to have a conversation with them, and then I simply explain the insurance part. And I do help people try to find someone on their panel.
I do as well.
Yeah, and they think that's helpful.
Yeah.
And it's all about creating goodwill in the community.
I completely agree, and I believe in karma too. So, but yeah, I mean, I also have try to make it as least stressful as possible. So, because we're supposed to do what's best for our clients.
Yeah, and if they're not going to end up working with you, I mean, you don't want to waste either of your time by talking extensively if they don't need to get into it and they're going to end up talking with somebody else. But I do think trying to start off with talking to them about what their concern is, and giving them some helpful information often does come back as people do come back wanting to work with you.
Yeah, I've seen that happen too.
Yeah, cool.
Great.
All right, and then as far as your policies and like your consent form, you said that you do have all of that information in your consent as well, correct?
I explain about insurance and what the process is, that every time I see them, I send in a claim form and has a diagnosis on it, what that could possibly mean for them in the future, in terms of future health insurance possibilities for them, that everything can go, that it can go to a national data bank, that per my contract I have to discuss things with their insurance company. I have no idea who's going to look at that, where it goes afterwards, who looks at it afterwards, or anything like that. That's in my consent.
Yeah, and that, I mean, and I would always say, they can contact their insurance company and ask those questions. But right, it's not, once they're giving us the right to provide that information to someone else, we can't control what happens after that point. And
right. I also tell them that, that computers are vulnerable to hacking, and, that it's something they should consider.
Yeah, and do you use paper records or electronic records?
Paper.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I think there are two sides to the coin, so I know lots of stories of people who use paper that have had things stolen, things broken into, and
well, I meant that in terms of with the insurance company, things get hacked all the time. So
yes,
that their information is vulnerable, and I don't, and they need to consider that as well, because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think as far as that goes, the information that hackers are trying to get from insurance companies are things to steal people's identities.
Right.
Not really. I mean, honestly, there really aren't any hackers who are like looking for clinical content and emails and want to read up on people's depression, right? So as far as like a lot of the technical stuff that we get concerned about as therapists, that's not usually what hackers are looking for.
I don't know. Maybe you haven't met some borderlines yet, but
Well, not typically what hackers are looking
No,
for.
I know.
Hackers, yeah, they're looking to get information they can sell, and they
Right,
can sell PHI, right? So they want people's names, social security
right,
numbers, date of birth, things like that. And
right.
that is a very real concern. There have been some major breaches with insurance
Hmm.
companies. Um, However, I think whether or not people get their mental health treatment through that insurance company probably isn't as relevant because their information's already in there. Um, that's just one of those things. So I personally shy away from trying to concern people about a lot of the digital stuff. We definitely want them to be aware that it is a possibility, 100%. But I would say to focus really on like what is the concern related to our field, and the concern is typically more about people closer to them. So sort of leading into one of the other things that you had brought up, things like social media and email and texting, and how do we incorporate those things into our policies. That's the stuff where it can come back and be a big concern for a lot of people. Because if someone has access to their email, or if they are on a shared computer and an email pops up and they don't want someone knowing that they're in therapy, um, then that is probably the more likely concern as far as our clients go and confidentiality.
Okay.
So what do you have for your? I know that you said you do have something in your policy about email and texting, because we talked a little bit before we started recording. And do you have any questions about like maybe wording or what to include or what not to include as far as email and texting policies?
Um, well, I know it's probably a good idea not actually to include not to text if there's an emergency of some sort, um, and that um, emails, there's disclaimers on your emails, etc. But I don't know what else to include about any of that in the consent.
Yeah, I think the emergency point is a really big one for both email and texting. I know there have been some court cases about that, and I wish I could remember the state. I should look up the specific case, but there was something about, a therapist and texting, and the idea that texting is considered like a more, where we expect a more immediate response than email, just socially as a culture, that's what we expect. So I think being really clear with both of those policies, the fact that you not only, how it relates to an emergency, but when you reply. So do you typically reply like within 48 hours, 24 hours? Do you only reply during certain business hours? That's what I would focus on, so people know what to expect as far as a reply from you, both for texting and email.
Okay.
And that way you're sort of covering all those bases. And again, that's one of those things that's just good to talk with people, because you don't want them texting you and then thinking that because you haven't replied within, a couple of hours, that you didn't get the text message, or that you're, not going to reply at all.
Right.
And then you did mention that, you try to limit texting to like only appointments and stuff like that, right?
That's basically what my texts usually are related to, are if they need to reschedule or something like that. It's not like usually a whole conversation.
Yeah. And do you have anything about that specifically in your policy?
I don't think so, but I will definitely. I'm in the process of redoing it, but I wanted to wait to talk to you before I actually finished it.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and a lot of people don't have this stuff in their policies yet. So that I would consider that too, like just talking about the content of both email and texts, and the fact that email and texts aren't necessarily private, because a lot of people can accidentally see them. The way we all have everything set up now, it's very easy. And like on your phone, if a text shows up on your home screen, That's something you want people to consider. So if they really don't want someone, especially someone with whom they're living, to know that they're in therapy, then how do they have you as their therapist in their phone, listed in their phone? So if they do want to text with you, but then you reply back and somebody sees it, how are they going to react to that? So those are the kind of things you want to think about talking with clients. But as far as your policy, I would say that the big thing would be to let people know, it's not always private. And for that reason, I encourage clients to limit the content of email and text communication to, appointments only. And then, definitely say that, they can feel free to leave you a voicemail if they have some other concern. And then, whenever you reply to voicemails.
Yeah, that's on my message.
Yeah, so that's what
message.
I think just a brief statement about it is fine. But definitely making sure that you say that, you encourage people to limit it to things related to appointments.
Okay.
And again, I mean, it really depends on how you work. And so, for example, I use an EHR where people can email me through the EHR. So when they get an email, it just says you have a message in the system, and then they have to log in. So they're not getting like emails direct to their email that have any written content in it. So I will encourage clients to email me updates and things, but I encourage them to do that within that system. So nobody has access unless they actually have their login. So there are different options for people, but you want to consider how you're doing that.
Okay.
Any other questions about texting and email? Then we can get into social media.
No, I don't think so. That, I think, covers that.
Cool. And so social media, you said that you wanted to talk about, and you have a Facebook page for your practice?
For my practice. And I haven't had any issues with that. I've had it more with LinkedIn.
Oh, okay.
Where I've had clients, want me to add them, and I just ignore them. and that's with previous clients or current ones. But with Facebook, it's really not been an issue. So,
yeah, a lot of times the privacy settings in Facebook, you can set it so that people don't usually see you, like even as an option to friend or whatever. And then with a Facebook page, I haven't heard of people having too many problems with a Facebook page.
No, because it's my business. So it's, I don't think people think to friend a business versus a person. But LinkedIn is different, and I just ignore that. And I mean, I really haven't discussed it or anything with any. It's happened with like 2 people, and they haven't said anything. And if they did, then I would address that. But just like I address if I happen to see them in public somewhere, that I can't go up to them and say, "Hi, how are you?" because that breaks their confidentiality.
Totally.
I would explain it the same way, that it would, I wouldn't feel comfortable because that could break their confidentiality as well. And I wouldn't feel comfortable with that either.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example to relate it to, real life
right.
circumstances. And I think that's a great way to think about a lot of the technology stuff is, how would we do this before all this stuff came up? So really good explanation. And there are different schools of thought with the social media stuff. I definitely think you want to include it in your consent or services agreement or whatever, larger form you have. But there are people who like outline specifically how they interact with clients on each platform. So they might say like on LinkedIn, I don't accept contact requests. I don't accept messages because, you can private message people through LinkedIn, go a little bit more in detail. And then like outline on the Facebook page. If you make a comment on my Facebook page, I won't reply, or I won't acknowledge anyone as a client on my Facebook page, that kind of thing. Then the other school of thought is to just sort of generally describe how you interact with people on social media. So that's what I choose to do, mostly because social media is changing so frequently, and there are all these different things. Like, what was it, 6 months ago, there was no Facebook Live option. Now there is. So that's a whole other thing to consider if you have a Facebook page and you want to do like live video, which can be great. But how do you interact with people on that live video? It's very different than what you would have done before. And there are new platforms popping up all the time. So I actually just describe how I generally interact with people on social media. And by saying, that I don't acknowledge people as a client ever, that I don't interact with people, and also letting people know that if they do ask to, like friend me or have me as a contact request or whatever, that I, will say no or will decline it. And it's, like you said, to protect their confidentiality. So it's not that you're trying to avoid them or that you didn't like them as much as another client or anything like that. But really considering like how people could consider that personally, because you could almost think that's like a client in public waving to you and then you don't wave back. And then they might think like, is it because they don't like me? What's going on? Did they not see me? So just letting people know up front, like I never accept those requests for any former clients or current clients, makes things a little bit easier.
So if you had a client make a comment on your Facebook page, you just wouldn't acknowledge it at all?
And I don't have a Facebook page for, I do for QA prep, but not for my practice. And QA prep is a little different. I think it's up to each person. So I don't necessarily think it's, wrong or breaking someone's confidentiality to reply to a comment that they have. You just obviously wouldn't want to reply in a way that would acknowledge them as a client.
Right.
So, because anybody could potentially leave a comment on your page.
Sure.
So if you just said thanks, that's neither here nor there. I think the important thing is letting clients know how you reply. So,
right.
If you say, yeah, I might reply to a comment, but I will never acknowledge you as a client.
Right. Yeah, I would never do that.
Yeah. So just letting people know. Them. Yeah. And so, but I think it's important to let people know so that they don't get hurt, because
absolutely,
we do expect people to interact on social media much like we do in person. And so it could easily be hurtful for someone to feel like they're being ignored or overlooked.
Absolutely. And I would never want them to think that. That's why I tell them, especially if I know that there's a very high probability that I will see them somewhere. I will tell them that from the get-go so that they know.
Yeah, great. So I would say, it can be just like a few sentences, a paragraph or two, but really just consider like how do you protect people's confidentiality in social media? How do you interact on social media? And outline that, and that's what goes in your policy.
That should work.
Cool. All right. Well, we are getting a little short on time here, but I know you did have another question about notes, and I wanted to get into that a little bit. So you had a question about wording for clients, HIPAA notes, things like that. So why don't I let you ask the question and we'll go from there.
Okay, so with HIPAA notes, I've seen templates for that and different ways to put. I know you have to have the basics, the client's name, the start time, the stop time. I know the basics, but it's more about how to word what you do with the client in session without giving too much away, so that if you're audited by the insurance company, they can have their needs met and you can still have your needs met by not giving too much away. That's,
Yeah.
you know, and I never think that, although I'll put like my little check boxes of like I did cognitive therapy or modeling or reframing or interpretation or whatever, I never think that I actually write what I do correctly.
How come? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Um, because I've never seen anybody ever teach it.
Yeah.
In all the years, I've never seen anybody. It's like they came up with HIPAA and they said, here, do this, and this is what you have to have, but they never told you how. How do you have to have these notes? What do you have to say? I've never seen that ever anywhere. And I'm of the note-taking people of err on the side of caution and don't reveal too much. So unless it's my personal notes for me. So I've never seen anybody do it or tell me how to in 25, since what, 1996 when it came into play. So,
Yeah.
That's probably why.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, when we talk about HIPAA notes, they're really not any different than regular notes. It's just that you're also taking into consideration the things that insurance wants to see on top of what is our regular ethical requirement for documenting treatment. So like you mentioned, like the things like start and end times and stuff that is important to insurance for things like billing codes and all that good stuff. So we don't have to think of them too differently from regular notes. The big thing that with insurance, well, first of all, I guess I am not necessarily of the camp that we write as little as possible, or that we write everything. I think it's about finding a nice balance. And insurance doesn't necessarily care how long your note is. They just want to know, does the client still need to be in treatment? So do they actually need therapy? And is therapy actually helping? So they want to see both things. If a client is doing very well, is showing up at work, having no problems at work, having no problems in their relationship, feels like they're doing pretty well and is in therapy for, quote unquote, personal development, that's the type of thing, insurance is not going to pay for. So they want to see that there's a little bit more of a need. However, at the same time, they want to see that someone is doing well in therapy. So if someone is in therapy for 10 weeks and has shown absolutely no improvement whatsoever, then they say, okay, we tried it. This is not an effective treatment method for this, this problem. And so it will no longer be approved. So it's looking at that balance of what is the progress along with what is the continued need. So that would be the big thing, I think, to highlight in every note whenever you are dealing with a client who's using their insurance to pay for therapy. And that can be as simple as making sure you just write one sentence in every note that says, client reported continued difficulty with whatever their difficulty is, relationships, communicating in relationships, concentrating at work, anything that would be related to a diagnosis that you would have provided. So client continued to report difficulty concentrating at work. However, also reported they were able to, implement mindfulness strategy taught in session twice last week. So you're identifying some type of progress along with that. And you can just put that in one sentence. And that way, that's covered every single time.
Could you write just those two sentences?
You definitely have to write more than that, but that would be covering the insurance mindset and making sure that you get that in. The rest of your note, I really focus on, what you did. And so one thing I think is helpful to consider is, what would you tell your client? Or what would your client say about what you guys did in therapy? So it doesn't have to necessarily be flowery clinical language. It could be something that's a little bit more layman's terms. And I do, personally, my clients all have access to all of their notes. So I actually purposely write my notes so that they are a little bit more understandable to, to a typical person. And someone doesn't have to have clinical training to understand what happened. And that's just something I choose to do. Not very many people do that, but
I'm with you on that.
I prefer to have clients have access and know, and that way it's something we're always on the same page about. Yeah. So that's something to consider. Is you don't necessarily have to, give your clients access to all of their notes, but think about, okay, if my client were reading this note, how would I explain it to them? Or how would I explain to, my client's parent, what we did today? And you can keep it really basic. I think the things that we want to keep from going into too much detail on, or, things that get a little bit more gory, like we don't have to identify who they had an affair with. We don't have to identify, specific other people. But if you're, I actually talked about this in another consultation with someone else, but if your client's having an affair, that's probably something that's pretty significant, and you're not going to hide the fact that they're having an affair. That's something you're going to be talking about consistently in therapy, right? So, right. But you wouldn't then, explain who the affair is with. You might use general terms so that you're not getting too detailed there. But we do need to explain enough so that you also want to think about, could another clinician read your notes and understand why you're doing what you're doing? So a lot of times we get scared about lawyers reading our notes, and we tend to focus on that. But realistically, it's just as likely that we could have a board complaint, right? And so if other people had to look at my notes and understand whether or not what I was doing was clinically appropriate, not just legal, then could they easily understand why I did what I did? Could they understand that I was appropriately treating this person for whatever length of time? So I'm not sure, does that help at all with sort of how to think about notes?
Tremendously help.
Good. Okay, cool.
Because I write in layman's terms, and I always think that I should, in quotation marks, write in the, therapist speak and all of this. And I have a thing for like affect and mood. And so I'll write, dysphoric or euthymic. And so if somebody else was reading that, they'd be like, well, what does that mean? And, my clients wouldn't necessarily know what that means. So now I can just put sad or, tearful or whatever, and yeah, they'll know what that means. So, but yeah, I write in very layman-esque terms because that's just who I am, and that's how I speak, and it just makes more sense. But to look at it from, if another therapist was reading this, would it make sense, and could it justify why I was doing what I was doing? Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and so that's about as much information as you need, and if you think about it, if you were looking at somebody else's notes, you don't need to know tons of detail, but if they just provided a little bit of information, you could get it probably.
Yeah, thinking back, I don't think people write notes that way, though. I think they just write what they did. I don't think they write to justify what they did. Or
yeah, it depends. It varies, and that's why when you said there's no like training on how to do it, and that's because everybody does it so differently. And if you work in an agency, they tell you one way, and then you move to another agency, they'll tell you a different way. And if you go to a college counseling center, they tell you a totally different way, and every supervisor will tell you differently.
I worked in an agency, and I'm trying to remember when it came out. I don't remember there being specific ways to do HIPAA notes when it first came out, and I worked in an agency.
Yeah, because it's really not any different than you do. It's just insurance. So there really isn't any like significant difference. The difference is were more around like policies that agencies had to implement. So they were probably a lot more focused on that.
But other than the basics in terms of time and like having specific identifying information about the client, they never told you anything else of what to write. So, which really is awful, because they tell you all this other stuff, but they never said anything else about the main part of it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it's, when I do workshops on notes, I often start out with looking at the different ethical codes, because all of our ethics codes have something about the fact that as licensed mental health professionals, we have to write notes about what we do. But most of them don't say much more than that. So we're
right.
really just not given very much direction. And I think part of that is because our jobs all look so, so different. You know, we all work in very different settings. And I think at a larger level, when, you know, professional associations, when federal and state laws, all of that are dictating what we do, they understand that they can't possibly give us a template or a directive about how to write notes, because it's going to look completely different depending on the setting you're in. So it's unfortunate, but I do get it on that level. So I don't know if that helps, but I think that's why. And then really it's incumbent on our supervisors in different settings to give us more direction on, you know, what our notes mean in each setting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that would make sense as to maybe why, you know, certain people don't get that direction, because it depends on the supervisors, etc.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, but very few people do get very much training in it. And so then it makes it difficult to know whether or not you're doing things the right way.
Well, they really should have just a training on HIPAA notes.
Yeah, they should have a training on a lot of things.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
But I am going to link to some sample notes at the bottom of this video, so so everyone can see a couple of examples of writing some notes, in particular that would be applicable for insurance companies. So I will definitely make sure you all have that.
Great.
Cool. Well, thank you, Julie, so much for your time.
Thank you, Melissa, for your time. I was so excited about meeting you, because I've read so much that you've done, and I so appreciate you taking the time and for all of your help. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, and thank you so much for asking a lot of these questions that I do hear all the time, and you know, being open about how you have or are thinking about implementing all these things in your practice.
Oh, most definitely.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And everyone, remember to check out the sample notes. You can just click below.